Minnesota has another good football team entering the 2023 season. PJ Fleck has done a great job replacing some of the departures with good talent both on offense and on defense. But is that 8 to 9 win standard that they've set in jeopardy because of a very difficult schedule, one of the most difficult schedules in the Big Ten Conference? Will the Fighting Flecks take a step back in 2023 in the win-loss column? Before I get into that, just a reminder to subscribe if you haven't already. Big Ten content all offseason long. Always crush that like button to spread the word of Big Ten TED to the masses. I want to say this. Minnesota has good talent this year. I know, and I'm going to get into that, and I'm going to really break this down as the video progresses on the schedule side of things. But when I look at the talent that this team has, they've lost some pieces on defense. They've been able to replace some of them. And then what they bring back on offense and what they've also been able to bring in at the skill positions via the transfer portal on offense equals a really good Minnesota team. If you're just looking at this schedule and you're saying, oh, you look at Michigan's on the schedule, Ohio State's on the schedule, they got to go on the road to Iowa, they got to play at North Carolina. You're just listing off games. I don't think you're doing your due diligence with the Minnesota Golden Gophers, because I look at all these tough games and I look around and I say they could be competitive in most of these games, if not all of these football games. Folks, this is a good team. This is a very good Minnesota football team, and this is a team where a coaching staff has come back. I know they lose their offensive coordinator, Kirk Shiraka, but this is a stable program. This is a stable team with good players on the offensive and defensive side of the football. Okay, so let's look into that schedule. I wanted to highlight some of the tougher games for Minnesota, and there's a handful of them. There's a handful of tougher games, but we need to look at them individually to really break down, will Minnesota take a step back or not? All right, let's take a look at the toughest games that the Gophers have on their schedule this season. September 16th. At North Carolina, one of the best quarterbacks in the country is Drake May. Tyler Nubin, Justin Wally, and some of those transfers that are coming in that secondary are going to be tested. That pass rush, that defensive line is going to be tested against the University of North Carolina. I know they have one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but maybe when I look at rosters, in NFL, they say 53 versus 53. When I look at the full rosters, there's a chance that Minnesota could be a more complete football team and could maybe force North Carolina to play a certain way. Despite Drake May and the talent that he has, I don't know if North Carolina is a super great team. I believe Minnesota can be fairly competitive in this game, but they're going to be tested with a quarterback talent like Drake May early on in the season. Now, if they're able to defeat North Carolina, and I think they're going to open the season by beating Nebraska at home, if they're able to win those two key games in September, there's a high probability that they could be undefeated going into the Little Brown Jug game against mighty Michigan in Minneapolis on October 7th. I think it goes without saying why this is a difficult game. Like when you lose a guy up front like a Trill Carter, defensive tackle that transferred to Texas, your run front is going to take a little bit of a hit. And when you face off against one of the best offensive lines in the country, you face off against the best running back room in the country, that is going to be a big-time test for Michigan. But Minnesota could be on a very big stage if they can get wins over North Carolina and Nebraska to start off the season in September. I don't think Minnesota, I mentioned this as a possible upset in a video last week on the channel, but I think this could be a game where Minnesota could be competitive because Michigan is coming off a road game the week before at Nebraska. You got to play at Minnesota. That's not the easiest West Division couple of road games in a row for the Wolverines. Maybe they could be worn down a little bit, especially if Nebraska can play them tough. So in this scenario, maybe Minnesota's rooting for Nebraska a little bit the week before to make it a little bit of a tougher game. But this is one where, Minnesota probably won't win this football game, but you want to see them competitive. Maybe make it a game for at least 3 quarters over there in Minneapolis. I've said this multiple times on this channel. PJ Fleck has an Iowa problem. Okay, last season was a prime opportunity for the Gophers for PJ Fleck to finally get over the hump and defeat Iowa. They had it in the palm of their hands, and then Mohamed Ibrahim fumbled it out of the palm of his hands against an Iowa offense that was not very good. Of course, last year that was having problems of their own last season. Now you got to go on the road to Iowa with a team that's probably going to be much improved on offense, that's still going to have a dynamite defense. The Ball Hawkeyes are still going to be flying around back there in the defensive backfield. This is going to be an extremely difficult game for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, but it doesn't mean that they can't hang around. Anybody going to Kinnick Stadium is extremely difficult, and now you put the Floyd or Rosedale on the line. Of course, the motivation of a rivalry game, that's another difficult game for the Minnesota Golden Gophers this season on the road at Iowa. I think that's the key. The location is the key in terms of this year's schedule. November 4th, I had to put on here because Minnesota hasn't fared well against the Fighting Brett Bielemas. Back-to-back losses in 2021 and 2022 against Illinois. Now, the good thing for Minnesota is that they get to host the Illini this season. That's the good thing. But Illinois, that ugly style of play, black and blue, bring your lunch pail, classic Big Ten mindset that Brett Bielema teams have given Minnesota some problems. I look at this game, though, and I see maybe what Illinois is lacking a little bit. I should say what they're losing. Sidney Brown, Devin Witherspoon in the secondary. And then I see Chris Ottman-Bell. I see Brevin Spann-Ford. I see Corey Crooms. I see Elijah Spencer. I see Lemeki Brockington. And maybe Illinois will have improved in the secondary by that point, but maybe this could be a day where Ethan Kaliakmanis could really prove his nickname, that he is indeed the Greek rifle, throwing it, because the front seven, I don't know how much Minnesota would be able to run. This is a really good Illinois front seven once again. That's a tough game because recent history has showed us that Illinois matches up very well with Minnesota. The last two games at Ohio State. Look, that's going to be, out of all of the games on this schedule where I see, it could be a 2-possession game, a 3-possession potentially loss for Minnesota, it'd be at Ohio State. I know a couple of years back, first week of the season, the game that Mohamed Ibrahim got injured, they played Minnesota very tough. They played Minnesota very well in that game. But going on the road at Ohio State, Kyle McCord is going to have a bunch of games under his belt by then. This offense and that receiving core, and then you look at the secondary. I like Justin Wally. I like the guys in the secondary for Minnesota. It's just Ohio State is a totally different animal. Going on the road that late in the season, extremely difficult for Minnesota. And then Wisconsin at home to finish the season. Now, you look at these games. Michigan is obviously going to be very tough. Ohio State is obviously going to be very tough. Iowa, let's say they fall in those 3 games. This Minnesota team could still turn around and be 9-3. This could still be a 9-3 team. This could still be an 8-4 team. At the top of the video, we talked about, is an 8-win season in jeopardy? Is a 9-win season in jeopardy? Right here, right now, in mid to late May, I'm going to say no. Because I look around at this Minnesota team and I look at the plethora of running backs that they have. A multitude of guys are going to replace Mohamed Ibrahim. You look at the Sean Tylers, you look at the Zach Evans, you look at the Bryce Williams, you look at true freshman Darius Taylor. It's going to be a by-committee running back attack for Minnesota. And I look at their passing game. Like, Ethan Kaliakmanis is going to have all the weapons at his arsenal to really make the Greek rifle a prolific quarterback possibly in the Big Ten Conference this season. Although this has been an offense that has been more physical over the past, you got one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten in Brevin Spann-Ford. You got a returning wide receiver in Chris Ottman-Bell that could be one of the better receivers in the Big Ten Conference. And then you look at those transfers that they brought in that look really good in the spring game. Elijah Spencer, slant route after slant route after slant route. You can tell already in the spring that the relationship is there between Ethan Kaliakmanis and Elijah Spencer. Lemeki Brockington stepped up at the end of last year. There's a bunch of guys in this offense. This is going to be a good offense, folks. This offense has all the potential to be very good. Is this the best total package on offense since 2019? It's very possible. It's very possible. Can the defense step up? It's a Joe Rossi defense. They're going to be fine. The 8-win season, the 9-win season, I don't think it's in jeopardy. I don't think it's in jeopardy. I believe Minnesota is going to be competitive in a lot of games this season. I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think Minnesota is going to take a step back because of their difficult schedule? Or do you think they're going to be competitive in a lot of games like me? Or do you think they're going to be just fine and they might be floating around that 8 to 9 win total once again? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.